The very first thing my boss's daughter did when she took over the company was fire me. She didn't even have the decency to call me into her new, ridiculously oversized office. Nope. She did it right there, in the middle of the open plan workspace, in front of absolutely everyone. "We're restructuring for a more dynamic future," she announced. The words sounded like they were straight out of a textbook she'd just read. "We need fresh perspectives." She glanced down at a tablet, refusing to look at me, the guy who'd worked for her father for 20 years. "Your role has been made redundant, effective immediately." I just stood there for a second. The hum of the servers in the next room suddenly felt deafening. My colleagues were just staring, their faces a mix of shock and pity. A few of them were people I'd personally hired, people I'd mentored. I could feel the heat of humiliation creeping up my neck. But then, as the shock started to wear off, something else took its place. As I turned to walk back to my desk to pack 2 decades of my life into a cardboard box, a slow smile spread across my face. She, in all her fresh-out-of-business school wisdom, had overlooked one tiny but very important detail. A detail that was sitting in a filing cabinet at my house. The very specific employment contract her own father had insisted I sign. The foundation. To really get the weight of that contract, you have to understand the man who wrote it, Arthur Harrison. Artie, as he always told me to call him. Artie wasn't just my boss. He was a mentor, and over 20 years, he became a friend. I started at Harrison & Sons when it was just a handful of people working out a cramped office above a bakery. I was 25, full of ambition, but pretty short on actual experience. Artie hired me as a junior project manager. He said he liked the fire in my eyes. Artie built his company on 2 things, a perfect product and unshakable loyalty. He treated his employees like family because, in the early days, most of them were. He knew our spouses' names, our kids' names, our dogs' names. When my wife was sick, he gave me 3 weeks off, fully paid, and told me not to even think about work. "Family first, always," he'd said, and you knew he meant it. In return, we gave him our all. We worked weekends, took red-eye flights, and poured our hearts into making his vision work. I didn't stay a project manager for long. I moved up, eventually becoming the chief operating officer. I was Artie's right-hand man. I was there for every major launch, every tense negotiation, and every celebration. I helped steer the company through 2 recessions and watched us grow from 12 people to over 200. And then there was Jessica. Jessica was Artie's only child, and to put it gently, she was different. While Artie built his empire with common sense and hard work, Jessica seemed to float through life on a cloud of privilege. She went to the best schools, but the main thing she seemed to learn was entitlement. Artie would try to get her to work at the company during summer breaks. She'd wander in around 11, tap on a keyboard for an hour while taking calls from her friends, and then leave for a 2-hour lunch she rarely came back from. She spoke entirely in corporate buzzwords. Everything was about synergizing, optimizing, and disrupting paradigms. I remember she once sat in on a strategy meeting and suggested we pivot to a blue ocean strategy by unlocking latent value in our core verticals. Artie just blinked at her, then turned to me and said, "Mark, can you translate that into English?" I couldn't. It was a word salad meant to sound impressive, but it was completely meaningless. Of course, Artie loved his daughter, but he wasn't blind. He saw her lack of work ethic and her total disinterest in how the business actually ran. And that's where the contract came in. About 5 years ago, when Artie started getting serious about retirement, he called me into his office. He looked tired. "Mark," he started, "this company is my life's work. The people in it, people like you, are my legacy. I have to leave it to Jessica. It's a family business. But I'm not a fool." He slid a thick document across his desk. "This is your new employment contract. I've had the lawyers draft it up. I'm doing the same for a few other key people." I picked it up. It was full of legalese, but Artie broke it down. It guaranteed my salary and bonuses for 10 years and laid out a huge severance package. But the most important clause, the one Artie tapped with his finger, was about termination. In most of the U.S., employment is at will, meaning you can be fired for almost any reason. But this contract overrode that. It stated in crystal clear terms that I could only be terminated for just cause. And just cause was spelled out in painful detail. We're talking gross misconduct, criminal negligence, or sustained, documented failure to do my job, which had to be proven over months of performance reviews. Think of it as an insurance policy. Artie explained, looking me right in the eye, for you and for the company. She's going to need good people around her, whether she realizes it or not. I need to know my most loyal people are protected from youthful foolishness. We both knew he meant protected from Jessica. I signed it on the spot. I took my copy home, filed it away, and honestly forgot all about it. Until now, the storm, Artie's retirement party, was bittersweet. We all shared stories and tried our best to ignore the elephant in the room. Jessica, standing beside her father looking bored and checking her phone. The following Monday, she was officially the new CEO. The vibe in the office changed overnight. The family spirit Artie had built was gone, replaced by a cold, sterile corporate culture. Memos replaced conversations. Jessica communicated mostly through company-wide emails with confusing and contradictory instructions. On her first day, she held a town hall meeting. She stood in front of us, not in a comfortable blazer like Artie, but in a designer suit that probably cost more than my first car. She talked for an hour, using every buzzword in the book. She said the company had been stagnant and that she was here to inject new blood and trim the fat. Not once did she mention her father's name or acknowledge the decades of success the company already had. It was a slap in the face to every single one of us. My firing came 2 days later. It was cold, public, and meant to send a message. The old guard is out. Walking back to my desk, my mind was racing. But underneath the anger, the memory of that contract surfaced like a life raft. A weird sense of calm settled over me. Okay, Jessica, you want to play? Let's play. I packed my things. My photos, my awards, the silly coffee mug my team gave me. My colleagues came over one by one, whispering their goodbyes, all of them scared for their own jobs. This is crazy, Mark. My head of sales, Dave, muttered. She has no idea what she's doing. I know, I said, shaking his hand. Keep your head down and keep me in the loop. I walked out of that building with my box of memories, but I didn't feel defeated. Far from it. The first thing I did when I got home was pull that contract out of the filing cabinet. I read it 3 times. Just cause. The phrase basically glowed on the page. She hadn't given a cause at all, let alone a just one. I spent the next week talking to an employment lawyer. He read the contract, and his eyes lit up. This is a thing of beauty, he said, like he was admiring a fine wine. This is a clear-cut case of wrongful termination. Her excuse of redundancy is a pretext, and a flimsy one at that, to legally eliminate a COO role in a bona fide restructuring. They'd need a mountain of documentation they clearly don't have. He was right. What they had was chaos. My old colleague Dave started calling me every few days with updates. Jessica had decided their biggest client was too old-fashioned and tried to bully them into a new, expensive service package they didn't need. The client, a man who used to play golf with Artie, was furious and threatening to pull a multi-million-dollar account. She'd also rolled out a complex new software system without any training because she read about it on a tech blog. It was a total disaster. Deadlines were flying by, budgets were out of control, and morale was in the toilet. The company Artie built with sweat and integrity was being run into ground by a tourist armed with thesaurus. My anger hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about my job anymore. It was about Artie's legacy. I waited, just like my lawyer advised. Let her dig the hole a little deeper. I gave it a month. A month of frantic calls from Dave. A month of watching the company I loved start to crumble. Then I heard she'd fired 2 more long-serving department heads and replaced them with more of her unqualified friends. That was it. It was time. The reckoning. My lawyer drafted a letter. It was a masterpiece of professional savagery, polite, formal, and absolutely devastating. We sent it directly to Jessica, with a copy to the board of directors. The letter laid out the cold, hard facts. It quoted my 20 years of loyal service and stellar performance reviews. Then it quoted the just cause clause from my contract verbatim. It detailed how my firing was a flagrant breach of our legally binding agreement. It also pointed out that claiming my role was redundant was provably false, given the chaos and financial harm the company was suffering now that the COO's duties were being mismanaged. Then came our demands. We didn't just ask for severance. We demanded full back pay, damages for wrongful termination, and immediate vesting of all my stock options. And for the final twist, it cited another beautiful little provision Artie had included. In the event of a legal dispute caused by the company's breach of contract, the company had to pay all of my legal fees. I would have paid good money to see Jessica's face when she signed for that letter. The silence that followed was deafening. For 2 days, nothing. I started to wonder if her ego was so big she thought she could just ignore it. Then, on the 3rd day, my phone rang. The caller ID said Harrison and Sons. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message from Artie popped up. Mark. His voice sounded exhausted. Please call me. We need to talk. I called him right back. He sounded heartbroken. I saw the letter, Mark. Jessica finally showed it to me after her lawyer spelled out the trouble she's in. I am so sorry. This is not what I wanted. I knew she could be reckless, but I never imagined this. It's not your fault, Artie. I told him, and I meant it. You tried to protect me. Your contract is the only reason I have a leg to stand on. A meeting was scheduled for the next week at the company's law firm. Me, my lawyer, Jessica, her lawyer, and Artie. I walked into that conference room feeling 10 feet tall. Jessica was already there, looking pale and small. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a sullen pout. She wouldn't even look at me. Artie sat at the head of the table, looking like a judge who wished the case had never come to court. My lawyer calmly laid out our case, presenting a timeline of the chaos that had rocked the company since I left, using all the info Dave had given me. When he finished, Jessica's lawyer cleared his throat. We acknowledge the contract, he said stiffly, and my client, Ms. Harrison, acknowledges that the termination process was not followed. We are prepared to offer the severance package. My lawyer just smiled. I'm afraid we're well past that, he said. Your client's actions constituted a malicious breach of contract, causing significant damages to my client, not to mention the damage she's done to the company her father entrusted to her. Our initial demand stands. Jessica finally snapped. This is ridiculous, she spat, glaring at me. I am the CO. I can fire whoever I want. Before her lawyer could stop her, Artie's voice cut through the air, low and dangerous. No, he said, his eyes locked on his daughter. You can't. Not when you're bound by a contract. A contract I put in place to stop you from doing exactly this kind of stupid, arrogant thing. You can just fire Mark. You spat on his loyalty. You spat on my legacy. You were given the keys to a finely tuned engine, and your first act was to take a sledgehammer to it. The room went dead silent. Jessica looked like she'd been slapped. All the fight just drained out of her. Her lawyer tried to negotiate for the next hour, but we didn't budge. By the end, they had no choice. They agreed to all of our terms. The settlement was substantial, enough that I'd never have to work again if I didn't want to. As we were leaving, Artie walked over. I really am sorry, Mark, he said, shaking my hand. I'm going back to the board for a while. We've got some serious damage control to do. I know you'll fix it, Artie, I said. You always do. I glanced over at Jessica. She was just staring at her hands. She had tried to erase the past and build a company in her own image, but she failed to read the fine print. She failed to understand that her father's loyalty to his people was stronger than his daughter's ambition. In the end, I walked away with my dignity restored and my future secure. I heard that Artie did step back in, and a few months later, Jessica was quietly moved from CEO to a vague head of brand development role with no real power. The 2 department heads she fired were hired back with raises. That big client? Artie smoothed things over, but the relationship was never the same. The company survived, but it was wounded. As for me, I took a long vacation. I traveled, spent time with my family, and remembered there's more to life than work. Eventually, I started my own small consulting firm, helping business owners avoid the exact kind of mistakes Jessica made. I get to be my own boss, and I make sure every single person I work with feels valued. What Jessica never understood is that a business isn't about buzzwords. It's about people. It's about loyalty, trust, and respect. Her father knew that. The contract he wrote wasn't just an insurance policy for me. It was a final lesson for his daughter. She wanted to fire me as her first power move. Instead, her first act as CEO was signing a check that paid for my early retirement. And you have to admit, there's a certain beautiful, synergistic, paradigm-shifting justice in that. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a boss who was completely out of their depth? Let's talk about it. Thanks for listening.